There's another question not easily answered. How could diplomacy succeed building an international coalition, mounting a naval blockade?
The draft resolution has been adopted.
And passing a dozen UN Security Council resolutions against Iraq, but fail to prevent war?
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, we will now put the draft resolution to the vote.
On November 29th, the UN Security Council authorizes the use of force if Iraq does not withdraw by January 15th. Only the second such vote in the UN's 45-year history. With Trump card now in hand, President Bush makes a surprise offer: face-to-face talks with Baghdad.
I am not suggesting discussions that will result in anything less than Iraq's complete withdrawal from Kuwait, restoration of Kuwait's legitimate government, and freedom for all hostages.
The same day, Iraqi soldiers deliver food to the beleaguered U.S. Embassy in Kuwait after cutting off food, water, and power months earlier. 89 small bruised apples, 45 tangerines, 80 oranges, cucumbers, 155 of them, and 1 case of cigarettes. And 6 days later, Iraq's president announces he will release the remaining hostages. Tearful reunions, and the world wonders. Is Saddam signaling he might also compromise on Kuwait? But the two sides can't agree on a date for talks. Bush had initially suggested any time before the UN January 15th deadline. But when Saddam insists on January 12th, the White House says no. 3 days wouldn't leave enough time for Iraq to pull its troops out.
Saddam Hussein is not too busy to see on short notice Kurt Waldheim, Billy Brandt, Muhammad Ali, Ted Heath, John Connally, Ramsey Clark, and many, many others on very short notice. And it simply is not credible that he cannot, over a 2-week period, make a couple of hours available for the Secretary of State on an issue of this importance.
Finally, the breakthrough. Secretary of State James Baker and Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz will meet in Geneva on January 9th.
You're smiling, sir. Does that mean you're hopeful?
I always smile.
Is there really any chance to avoid a war? The unresolved issues are formidable. Not only the future of Kuwait, but also Iraq's weapons of mass destruction and the question of Israel's 25-year occupation of Palestinian land. Making talks more difficult, the atmosphere is inflamed with rhetoric.
It is Saddam Hussein who lied to his Arab neighbors. It was a ruthless assault. 2 weeks ago, I made mention of the Nuremberg trials. The world will hold him accountable. What we are looking at is good and evil, right and wrong.
In Baghdad, the rhetoric is equally tough, as Saddam appeals to Arabs in the Muslim world with personal attacks on Bush. The talks in Geneva bring a temporary ceasefire in the war of words, but nothing to prevent the bombs and bullets. Baker and Aziz began with a handshake. News photographers ask for this pose. The talks are calm, direct, intense.
Mr. Baker, why did you have to break?
Because we've been at it for quite a few hours. Everybody wanted to wash their hands.
A last-ditch peace effort, but after 6.5 hours of anxious talk...
Regrettably, ladies and gentlemen, I heard nothing today that, in over 6 hours, I heard nothing that suggested to me any Iraqi flexibility whatsoever on complying with the United Nations Security Council resolutions.
Iraq insists, as it has since August, any withdrawal from Kuwait must be linked to the Palestinian issue. Again, the United States refuses linking the two issues, insisting that rewards Iraq's aggression.
And is it your conclusion after this meeting that war with the United States is inevitable?
Well, that's up to the American administration to decide.
With the Geneva talks talked out, embassies in Baghdad began evacuating their personnel. Hospitals prepare for casualties.
When do we want peace? When do we want it? Now! Never again! Never again!
Anti-war protests continue across the United States. But public opinion polls show 62% approving military force to get Iraq out of Kuwait, up 20 points since the crisis began. Hope for an 11th hour peace rests with UN Secretary General Javier Pérez de Cuellar. He had gone to Baghdad in September and returned empty-handed. After this last meeting on January 13th, he is asked, will there be war?
It is something which only, if you believe in God, only God knows.
Only God. Only George Bush. Only Saddam Hussein. Pérez de Cuellar makes a last personal appeal on January 15th, the UN deadline. Saddam does not reply.
Regrettably, ladies and gentlemen, I heard nothing today that, in over 6 hours, I heard nothing that suggested to me any Iraqi flexibility whatsoever.
Mr. Foreign Minister, if the war starts in the Middle East, in the Gulf, will you attack Israel?
Yes, absolutely yes.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak.
On January 13th, 2 days before the United Nations deadline, I was in Baghdad to interview President Saddam Hussein. I began to smell war, although I hoped it would not come. A very senior Iraqi official told me his nation would ignore the deadline because Iraq could not stomach being told what to do, even by the world community. Civilian militias sprang up on street corners. Boys were given guns and automatic rifles. People hoarded food. Iraqi officials told me the interview with Saddam would come 1 or 2 days after the January 15th deadline. I was forced to wait for Saddam, to wait in Baghdad with CNN correspondents Peter Arnett and John Holloman, to wait for what came.
Something is happening outside. The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated. We're seeing bright flashes going off all over the sky. Peter?
Now the sirens are sounding for the first time.
The liberation of Kuwait has begun. In conjunction with the forces of our coalition partners, the United States has moved under the code name Operation Desert Storm to enforce the mandates of the United Nations Security Council. As of 7:00 p.m., Operation Desert Storm forces were engaging targets in Kuwait and Iraq.
It's kind of scary to think what damage we're going to be doing and how many lives we're going to be taking.
Whoa, holy cow. That was a large airburst that we saw. It was filling the sky with dust.
And I think, John, that airburst took out the telecommunications. Yeah. Now you may hear the bombs now. If you're still with us, you're going to hear the bombs now. They are hitting the center of this city.
Just one comment. Clearly, I've never been there, but this feels like we're in the center of hell.
Now, The 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force.
And Bush, the Satan, has perpetrated his crime. He and the criminal, and the great battle has been initiated, the mother of all battles.
We will not fail.
There continue to be these flashes of light off in the distance to the south. Peter Arnett, your reflection.
Yes, John, I couldn't help thinking as I heard the bombs, the distant bombs.
Well, from what I saw last night, I cannot imagine if this goes on more than another day that they would have any kind of will to fight at all.
Good job. Good job, buddy. It was pretty wild to drop them for 10 years and not ever see one go off like that.
We are flying a total of about 2,000 air sorties of all types each day. More than 80% of all of those sorties have successfully engaged their targets.
This is my counterpart's headquarters in Baghdad. Headquarters of the Air Force, and keep your eye on all sides of the building as the airplane overflies the building and drops the bomb down through the center of the building.
This is the city that Saddam Hussein said he would attack with missiles should the multinational force attack him.
It is a just war, and it is a war with which good will prevail.
Will there ever be a greater battle than the battle in which, on the one side, God leading, and on the other, devil or Satan leading?
There is no one more devoted, more committed to the hard work of freedom than every soldier and sailor, every Marine, airman, and Coast Guardsman, every man and woman now serving in the Persian Gulf.
We're going home. We're going home alive. We're not going to go home dead. We're going to go home alive with a big victory under our belt.
The winds of change are with us now, and we move toward the next century more confident than ever that we have the will at home and abroad to do what must be done, the hard work of freedom.